Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be looking at the stroke tab inside of the Brush Creator. So the first thing we're going to look at here is the size panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to minimize all these other ones to keep this a little bit more clear and easy to understand. Max size, we talked about over here in the properties panel on the left. The size here, we want to keep this right around 50%. And then what we want to do is we want to, per brush, change the max size. So here with a max size of 300, and before we do this, we're going to bring this to 0. This 0 right here, this means that we are affecting the size of the brush 0%. Notice that this goes the same size straight across. With pen pressure set to 0, max size, we're going to adjust this. If we bring this down to 150, this is the maximum size. We bring this up to 500. This is the maximum size. It's important to note that the tools have different maximum sizes internally. So while you may adjust the max size here, you'll notice that acrylics might be a little larger than a pencil would be at the maximum size. Let's put this max size of this brush all the way up to 700. We can adjust it over here in the properties panel, size to 100, and we're going to get a much bigger end result. Let's restore that back to default using Reset Brush Changes, which is Control-Shift-H. And to the right is Save Changes as Default. Again, I recommend moving these over to your favorites folder. That way these stay unaffected. But either way is completely fine. If we wanted to make another liner brush, we could duplicate that brush preset, Control-Shift-P. Notice that it is now liner 3. It's not liner 2 because liner 2 already exists. Here, Save Volumes and Paint Modes was selected. So notice that this has this little icon in the corner. It changes and is saved, and it's only saved when we use this Save Changes as Default option. Now when we switch back and forth, notice that this mode, this paint mode, is switching. If we deselect Save Volumes and Paint Modes into Brush Preset, we deselect it, notice the icon is gone. If we go over here into Paint Mode with Liner, and then we jump back over here, this is set at the software level. This is set at 3. That means all of these other ones that don't have the save volumes, this is all going to be the same brush. And we're looking right here in the properties panel at this paint and blend mode icon. The only one that it will change for is this one that is already saved into the brush preset, into this brush. All right, let's look at the second property here, size jitter. So this is going to add these little bumps and ridges here. This is the size. Jitter means randomizer. You can see this reflected here in the line itself. It's randomizing the size. 98% of the shape and grains that go down to create the stroke are being jittered in size to some amount. This pen pressure, the curve editor, we're going to click on Reset so we can see how this works. And we did this earlier. We're going to drag up to create just a single node. This is full size. This is size. Size is adjusted with low pressure. It's affecting the size a low amount. With high pressure, it's affecting a high amount. So here, with low pressure, we have a low effect on size. With high pressure, we have a high effect on size. And most of the time, that's what we want. You can reverse this. And the harder you push, the smaller the line gets. But then when you release, realize that there's a funny little bump. Now, tip tilt. Let's increase the size of our brush here to 50%. As we push on the screen, what you can see is the size of the brush is growing and shrinking. This is a setting inside of Preferences. Here in Tools, Painting Cursor, you can see that we can change cursor shape according to tip tilt, change cursor size according to pen pressure, a number of different options here that are explained in the other tutorials. So here we want to simplify what we're seeing here so that I can show off the tip tilt. So we're going to go to Preferences and we're going to turn off Change Cursor Size according to pen pressure. Now you're going to see this is the max size being displayed the whole time. Now as we adjust tip tilt, my stylus right now is perpendicular to the screen. As I bring it closer to parallel and I set it on the screen, you'll notice that it's changing as I tip the stylus. And this is changing the actual shape, the shape that's going down. So if we selected a star, the star would go down with its shape tilted. The amount of tilt is here, with light tilt being on the left and heavy tilt being on the right. Here we're adjusting height and width. Width is not being adjusted at all. With tilt, here the tilt being the strongest tilt on the right, here you can see the word parallel. On the left it says perpendicular. Here on the left side here you can see small, size, and large. This is small, medium, and large. What's affecting is the size. So here we have height, we have this going up and down. Right here on the left, all of this being together means that we're going to have a, let's return this back to a circle. We'll just reset. The reason that this is on the second half is we want some of our line, some of our tilt angles to not be tilted. So only when we get to a certain level, so the stylus is tilting to the right or to the left, and as it gets to about here, so styluses don't work at 100% tilt, fully parallel. So these angles from 90 to about 60% from 90, so down to about 30 degrees. Most styluses will work this range right here. It doesn't work from here up to about 30 degrees. So when you're drawing with your stylus here, these ranges, we want some of them to be unaffected so we can go from unaffected to affected. So that's what this right here, low, pen tilt, high, this is what that is affecting. So if we put this right here and uneven, we're going to have a funky looking circle. No matter how we place the stylus, we want this to be even, height and width. So now we have an actual circle. Now if you want the effect to be greater, you can bring this down, and I recommend keeping these lines even. Using precise tip tilt will constrain some of the tilt properties to make it a little bit more refined. I'd suggest turning this on or off if you have trouble with tilt. Tilt also, if you're using a tablet mode, some of these, if you're on the wrong one, may work for almost everything except for tilt. If tilt's not working, you may want to change this to Wacom compatible WinTab, or try on Windows 8 Plus pointer input, or Windows Ink compatible, or X7. Make sure that you're on the right one here. You can test that. You'll need to restart the system after making that change in some situations. All right, let's reset this back to 0 and take a look at opacity. These have the same meanings here as they do in size. So we have the word jitter here, pen pressure here. Jitter is going to affect the jitter of that line. Let's go ahead and remove the pen pressure. So we are just sitting at a stagnant 0% effect. So we can hone in just on the opacity. So opacity jitter, this is going to affect the randomization of opacity. This is a bit harder to see actually in a watercolor brush because it diffuses. Here you can see splotches of light and dark. And actually at this point, it might be a good idea to explain spacing. So we're going to bring our spacing up to 100 and jump to shape and grain to explain something real quickly. And we're going to switch here to the star. Now the star doesn't quite touch the edge. This square right here, these shapes over here are in a square. That square is 512 pixels by 512 pixels. So we have about half of it is filled with white. The white is the part that we see on the screen. So that part passes through. That's like the wet part of the paint. The black part's like there's no paint. This grain, this is going to work like a mask. And so if you have a fully white mask right here, that's like having, let's adjust this a little bit more up to 100. And let's change our opacity jitter back to 0. So white is like if you had a mask, it's like having a screen over the top of a flashlight. And here's our paint, our light is coming through. So you can see we have all of these beautiful shapes passing through this lens on our flashlight. So if we change this to something different, this is fully white. Well, what happens if we made it fully dark? Notice immediately up here that line goes away. This is like putting a cap on top of the flashlight. We're blocking all the paint, all the light from passing through. This is what allows this shape to come through all the way. If we were to pick something darker, notice that less is coming through. If we choose something that's modeled like this, notice that we have bits and pieces coming through the white sections here. If we increase the size, that will affect what parts of our shape are passing through. Let's keep this at a plain white and go back to stroke. So what we see is we see those 512 images right next to each other. We're seeing 100% every single time we're creating a stroke is 100% of this image, the whole square, right next to each other. Now, if we go back over here to stroke and we reduce this to 50%, this is going to overlap 50% of that square, that 512 image. 50% overlapped. If we bring this down to 25, this is going to overlap 75% of that shape and grain combo. Again, you can have multiple shape and grain combos here, which can be adjusted by pen pressure or pen tilt in a number of different fancy ways, and we'll get to that spot. For right now, these two images are overlapping 75%. We want to bring this down to even further. You can see that we start getting what looks like a more traditional paint stroke. This can be system intensive. So if your system is running slow, this might need to be adjusted lower. One of the things that can help with that is using this smudge. This smudge property will blend those images together. Smudge density will affect at what level that smudging happens. All right, let's put this back up to 100. Turn off smudge. Let's increase spacing jitter. The further to the right you go, the more jitter it is. And you can see, again, you can see this reflected in the line here at the top. Just a little bit of jitter, making this a little bit more random and natural looking. Scatter is a vertical jitter, whereas the spacing jitter is just horizontal. Now here at the very bottom, we have an option. We're going to reduce this down. We're going to bring this over to make this more like a brush stroke. We have the option to smudge on paper bumps. This paper, this yucca paper, has a lot of bumps in it. We have smudge on paper bumps. This is a speed-based smudging. We're going to adjust the speed level. Short and long, this is the amount of smudging that happens. This is actually here, this is not pressure, this is speed. So we're going to adjust this up to a single node. Now this smudge on paper bumps requires the brush to have a certain property on it. So here we're going to jump over to paint. And right here, for this to demonstrate on the screen, we need to turn paper texture strength up. We're going to bring it all the way over. Bringing this to a single node so we can see what it does. Here, what you can see is the bumps of the paper are smudging the paint. If we turn this off, you're going to notice that we get this reaction on the bumps of the paper. We're seeing in painting on the ridges of the paper, not the valleys. We turn on smudge on paper bumps. Notice that we're smudging on these paper bumps. To see this work, we need to adjust this low on the left, high on the right. No smudging on paper bumps, and we speed up and we see the smudging. No smudging on paper bumps, and we speed up, we see smudging. Now, scatter has another option here, smudge scatter mode. This is disabled unless you turn smudge on. In smudge scatter mode, this will adjust either parallel or perpendicular. So now notice if we switch to perpendicular, it goes up and down in its smudging direction. We use parallel, it smudges to the right and left, parallel to the line itself. Now there's one additional setting here that we haven't gone over. This is nonlinear opacity. And this opacity, so here our opacity we have set at 1. 1 is a multiplier. On the right side is the opacity level. So if we bring this down, notice the line above changes. This is where I would adjust opacity first when you're creating a brush, as opposed to opacity in the properties panel. Again, we want to keep this at about 50% while we're testing these different things. Keep in mind when you're adjusting opacity, if you want a fully opaque line, adjusting it here will help you get there. But again, I don't recommend starting that way when you're creating a brush. Now, 1, this is a multiplier. So if we increase this, this is going to do 4 times this amount over here. So if we have this set to 25, this line is going to be very, very similar, although not identical, to this line right here. 4 times 25, we have this line, 100% opacity, 10 times 10. It's going to be a very similar opacity level. This can go all the way to 100. And then adjusting on the right side to make that as opaque as possible. As you use this multiplier, any subtle nuance in opacity in the actual line itself will be lost. So keep that in mind. For the highest fidelity line, keeping this lower works best. When this option right here is enabled nonlinear opacity, this slider over here in the properties panel is going to have a greater effect than this multiplier here. When I uncheck it, this multiplier here is going to do more work in increasing the opacity than when this is unchecked. When this is turned off, this is going to behave uniquely in Rebelle 7. That's it for the stroke section. If you have questions, put it in the comment section below. In the next video, we're going to go in depth into the shape and grain, source, shape, and grain properties in the Brush Creator. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.